Sit back, it's time to get groovy. Question, do you remember that movie?
Welcome back to Remember That Movie. I am the third Alejandro Rosa on IMDb.
And I'm Steve Johnston, and I am not on IMDb.
And we're back with another episode and another movie. This time, it was my turn to pick something from the vault of time, and I picked something that I will say is from my childhood, though this is definitely not a children's movie.
Well, no, you're right. This is not a children's movie.
No. We decided to take a trip to 1987 for the futuristic, dystopian, whatever you want to call it, action film Robocop. Let us begin right off the bat with a sort of description of the plot, just to get us started. The future. Detroit. The streets are full of crime. The Omni Consumer Products Corporation has taken over management of the Detroit Police Department. To stop the crime in the streets and make way for the creation of Delta City, OCP decides the solution is in robotics. After a trial of a fully robotic police officer goes awry, a second project, Robocop, is put into place. After police officer Alex Murphy is captured, tortured, and murdered by notorious criminal Clarence Boddicker and his gang, his body is used by OCP to create a cyborg police officer known as Robocop. Robocop starts fighting crime in the city. Robocop slowly starts to piece together who he was and those that murdered him. Robocop then pursues justice for his murder and the destruction of his life. And there's like a bunch of violence.
Oh, yeah.
That, my friends, is the 1987 Robocop.
I like that your description ended just as abruptly as the movie does.
Steve, please share with me and the audience, what is your history with Robocop?
I knew of Robocop, a very classic movie, was too young to see it when it originally came out, but eventually saw it whilst in college. It was on one of the late night movie programs that we had in the limited cable in the dorms. So watched it then, I enjoyed it then, and hadn't watched it since.
Wait a minute, so we're talking like 1997, 1998, when you watched
99.
Robocop? 99?
Yes. Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
You didn't watch it till then?
Yeah.
Well, I will counter your story by an inappropriate version of my experience with Robocop.
Do the letters HBO come into play?
Of course they do, because everything in my life, apparently, this podcast has really taught me that I owe HBO a lot. Or I should talk about it in therapy. I'm not sure which. Robocop was a film that, of course, I did not see in theaters. It came out July of 1987, so I was way too young to go to the movie theater to see it. However, like all things, it came to HBO at some point, and I definitely saw it. I saw it multiple times, and I loved it. I loved it, and I know that I played the video game at the arcade, and I'm pretty sure I had the Nintendo version of the game, because there were games of this film, which will be surprising once we talk about the film a little bit more. There were also toys. I'm pretty sure I had a Robocop toy. Either that, or I dreamt it in a fever dream, or I wished it. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure I had a Robocop toy. The poster is so ingrained in my brain, and I probably did see the poster in theaters. I'm sure I didn't see the movie in theaters, but I definitely saw the poster.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Bryan actually created the poster. Something I did not realize, if you ever look up the poster, folks, it's a photorealistic painting. That is not a photograph of him getting out of the car. That's a painting.
Dang, that's impressive.
Let's talk about the cast of Robocop. First and foremost, Peter Weller. Are you familiar with Peter Weller?
Largely because of the introduction through Robocop, and then I have seen him on a couple of television shows that he has done since, where he has played guest characters, all of which who have had this kind of withdrawn, slightly crazy tint to them, which I thoroughly enjoy.
He's great.
He is.
I'm going to go into Peter Weller's bio because I am absolutely fascinated with it. First and foremost, in 1970, he graduated from North Texas University for studying theater. Then he went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and he graduated from there in 1972. He has appeared on Broadway, as well as 70 films and television shows. He's voiced for animation. He's voiced for video games. He's also an accomplished director, which is not something that I knew until I started doing research for this. He had a short film called Partners in 1994, which was actually nominated for an Academy Award. He has directed all kinds of shows, including several episodes of Monk. He directed 11 episodes of Sons of Anarchy, which he actually appeared in for the last 2 seasons of the show. In 2023, 36 years after this film came out, he voiced the character of Robocop for the most recent Robocop Rogue City video game.
Oh, fantastic.
That is not the first time he has actually voiced Robocop for a game. Mortal Kombat 11, you can play as Robocop.
That's right.
Which came out in like 2020. And apparently there was a Family Guy game that he actually voiced Robocop as well. Here's fun and random.
Random, if you will.
Oh.
No, please cut that. That's horrible.
I'm not going to cut that. That's fantastic. In 2004, when he was in his late 50s, he completed a master's degree. His master's degree, Roman and Renaissance art. In 2013, he was awarded his PhD in Italian Renaissance history.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And he's apparently taught Italian art classes or Italian history, art history in university. How freaking cool. Playing what I can only say is the only female truly in the cast is Nancy Allen. I'm sorry, it's true. She plays Officer Ann Lewis, who ends up being Robocop's partner, and also the character Alex Murphy's partner before he dies horribly. She is famous for being in the movie Carrie. She was in the film Blowout and Dressed to Kill, which actually got her a Golden Globe nomination. She did a series of films. She was actually married to Brian De Palma for a period of time. But in 2008, she shifted her career from acting to cancer support and eventually became the executive director of the We Spark Cancer Support Center for Families. Excellent. And that is what she has dedicated her life to. Now, our bad guy, the big bad himself, Clarence Boddicker, is played by Kurtwood Smith. Are you familiar with Kurtwood Smith?
I am familiar with Kurtwood Smith.
Well, yes. How do you know Kurtwood Smith?
I know Kurtwood Smith from That 70s Show.
He plays Red in That 70s Show.
And I have to say that when he makes his first appearance on screen in Robocop, and he is just yelling at his crew that they have burned the money that they have just stolen, in the back of my mind, I wanted him to say, "Dumbass."
And don't get me wrong, he's got like 50 film credits. He's been in tons of television. And actually I don't know if it's still on, he was playing Red in That 90s Show, which was the follow-up to That 70s Show. He got to come back. Miguel Ferrer.
Yes.
Very famous Miguel Ferrer plays Bob Morton.
Is this one of his earlier roles? And I'm asking that just based on how young he looks.
This is actually his breakout role.
He plays sleazy 80s businessman so well.
So well. In fact, there's a great scene later in the film where he's just snorting cocaine, and it was like he was made to do it. Yes. So he, of course, has his own incredible career, everything from Twin Peaks, NCIS, Hot Shots Part 2.
Dude.
I knew you were going to correct me if I didn't say Part 2. Iron Man 3, Traffic, and something that I didn't know, he was the voice of the villain, Shan Yu, in the original animated Mulan.
Oh, okay. Cool.
I had no idea that was him.
Neither did I.
He is the son of famous Puerto Rican actor Jose Ferrer.
Yes.
And his mother, Rosemary Clooney.
Whom we just saw in the previous episode.
We did? Did I forget that?
I think you did. She was one of the singers that performed in her final film role.
That was one of the ones who was her final film role. Oh,
yes.
That's awesome. And I totally paid attention to that. This is why it's difficult when only one of us does the research for each one.
Right.
Unless we're really listening, we miss things.
So what you're saying is you're not really listening when I tell you stuff about the movies?
What? Easy segue. So, Miguel Ferrer is cousin to...
I'm guessing George Clooney?
Yes, Rosemary Clooney is George Clooney's aunt.
That's right.
Don't say that's right like you knew that. I didn't know that.
Okay, I didn't know that. I knew there was a connection.
One more just for fun. Dick Jones, played by Ronnie Cox, who is famous for being in the film Deliverance. And for any of you film buffs, one of the reasons he got the role, he could play the banjo. He's actually very well known for being in Beverly Hills Cop 1 and 2. I actually looked to see if he's in the new Beverly Hills Cop, and he is not. He has actually chosen to spend most of his life as a musician. And so he has said that he purposely turns down roles all the time because he'd rather do music with his band. But every once in a while he shows up and does a part here or there. So how did this film come to be? This film was written by Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner. That's probably the last time I'm going to say Edward's last name because I'm really afraid I'm going to mispronounce it. So I'm going to call him Edward. Edward and Michael.
There you go.
Edward was working in Hollywood, and at some point he was on the set of a little-known film called Blade Runner. He was working in the art department for like a week. At 4 a.m, he's hanging out, and he truly looked at somebody and said, "What's this movie about?" And they were like, "Well, this thing is a robot, and this person doesn't know, but he's a robot too." And he goes, "I wonder what a robot would think walking around this set." And then a few weeks later, he had another idea, and he thought, what if that robot had been a human who was now a robot? And thus was birthed the concept for Robocop.
Cool.
It was directed by Dutch filmmaker Paul Verhoeven. He would go on to direct Total Recall, Starship Troopers, Basic Instinct, and Hollow Man. He actually turned down this film. He read it, did not get it, and said, "No thanks." And then his wife read it and said, "Read it again, Paul." She said, "You missed the soul of the script." She was very connected to the concept of a person losing their humanity and trying to gain it back. And she thought that was great. He blames his limited English on not understanding the satire that was built into the film.
Right.
When he met with the writers, they actually gave him comic books to read, saying this is kind of the tone that we're going for. And then he got it. He's like, "Ah, yes." And he said it in a more Dutch way. So this film is meant to be satire. It's meant to have comedy. And the violence, which is quite a lot, is purposely over the top insane. This is all part of how they constructed this satire, which in the process is also making fun of or making a social criticism of the 80s and Reagan and this corporatization of America. I found an article where Edward talked about this and said, look, it makes total sense for you now. You see Amazon and Facebook and all these companies. It's absolutely normal for corporate America to be in charge of everything. But in the 60s and 70s, that was not the case, or it wasn't so blatantly out there.
Right.
In the 80s, it's almost like they came out and were like, no, we're seriously in charge of everything. And everything became a business. Everything was a business solution. School, universities, hospitals. It all became a business problem. And so in writing this, the concept was, what really does happen if a corporation truly starts taking over everything? Steve, watching this film, the first thing that does come to mind is, wow, is this thing violent? Was that your reaction?
I wouldn't say that was the first thing that came to mind. The first thing that came to mind was exactly what you just described, that, wow, this movie really kind of predicted exactly what was going to happen. And I don't think it intended on doing that.
Okay, let's not focus on that, because then we have an existential crisis when we should be having a fun podcast about film. So anyway, Robocop. Why was I watching this as a child? Oh my God, is this film violent? 5 seconds into the movie, arms are being blown off. I was in shock.
A lot of gore, which I was not expecting the first time that I watched it. And even now kind of made me sit back and go, whoa, yeah, we're not just going to shoot him once or twice. No, we're going to unload an entire magazine and every bullet's going to have a squib. And at the end of it, yeah, he looks like spaghetti. I'm trying to think because relatively recently, like in the past couple of years, there was a shift towards that in some TV shows, some animated shows, where it's like, okay, we're not just going to show blood. We are going to show like realistic intestines and stuff like that. I couldn't help but think that, oh, this movie from 1987 fits very well into the kind of gory stuff that we have access to today.
Just to kind of give an idea for anybody who's never watched this film.
Yes, yeah.
The film, the Omni Consumer Products are having a board meeting, and they're presenting their newest thing, which is a completely robotic cop. Doesn't sleep, doesn't eat, can just work. And it's this giant machine, the ED-209.
Yes.
And they have a kind of demonstration. They have one of the young executives hold up a gun. This scene is incredible because it sets the tone for the entire film.
Mm-hmm.
They say, here, you hold up this gun, and that'll actually activate it. And they'll be like, put the gun down, put the gun down. The guy throws the gun down, but the thing doesn't stop. And then it destroys the man. My comment was, Jesus! Exclamation point.
He shoots him some more, then shoots him again, and then shoots him another couple of times just for good measure.
In the boardroom. Like all the executives are everyone's in suits, and he just like collapses, and you're just like, what is this movie already?
I was trying to figure out if there was supposed to be some sort of foreshadowing or something along that lines, because the bloody corpse of the executive collapses onto the model of the utopian city that they're hoping to build.
My favorite thing is that, of course, they have the classic CEO who's sitting there. He looks at the guy who just presented the robot and says, Dick, I'm very disappointed. The man, it has like 1,000 bullets in him. There's a man laying there, and this is the comment. And then, of course, the follow-up comment, this is Dick Jones, our super corporate bad guy. His follow-up comment is, oh, well, I'm sure it's only a glitch. Again, I'm just sitting there like, what is this movie? What is happening here? Interestingly enough, the ED-209, which, of course, plays a prominent role in the film, is stop motion.
Yes.
Which was very surprising. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Alex Murphy, Robocop, in what I would call a ridiculous scene, he and his partner, who have been on the streets for all of 5 seconds, chase after a gang and decide not to wait for backup, even though they're clearly outnumbered. They're just like, nope, let's just go into this big, giant, empty building and find everyone, and it'll be all good. And it's not all good, folks. Alex Murphy ends up getting surrounded by the gang, and then they take turns shooting him, which is the most gross, not the most gross. There is one more scene that is way grosser at the end, but just so gross. Like, they start off by just shooting off his hand and then his arm, and then they shoot him in the body, and then they shoot him in the head while he is, what is he doing? Screaming. And I'm sitting there going, this was a kid's movie? Why?
This scene was absolutely brutal.
Capital B, brutal. And I was like, why? Why are we doing this? That was all I could think about. Like, why are we doing this? This is horrible. Why was this necessary? On a kind of happier note, the theme music, when it started playing later on in the film, I remembered it from my childhood. Apparently, I've blocked out all the blood and the death, but I remembered the music. Unfortunately for Anne, our wonderful female cop, who gets the worst takedown that I can remember of a woman being taken down in an action film ever. She catches one of the bad guys while he's peeing.
Oh, yes.
He turns around with his hands up, clearly having not
put things away.
That's very nice. How polite of you. Then he says, mind if I zip this up? Here's where I got infuriated. She's holding a gun to him, and what does she do?
Well, you have to frame this correctly, though, because the infuriating part is that, yes, she's got the gun, and she stares right at him, and she stares at him for a full 5 seconds before the eyes suddenly dart down. Why? You were doing so well.
You're a police officer. This is the violent criminal. That makes no. Shame on you, writers. That was garbage. I was so mad. And of course, she looks down, and then he smacks her and throws her over a railing. And then poor Alex is busted into 100 pieces with guns. This is how this film starts. But that's okay, because then the corporation takes his husk of a body and they turn it into a robot. They have all these scenes of them essentially building him, putting him together, and then they show up at a police station as a robot cop. What was your impression of of RoboCop?
Even today, I still liked it. I think it held up. I'm assuming that that is actually Peter Weller in some very ridiculous costuming, yes?
100% that is Peter Weller.
Fantastic.
It took them 6 months to find somebody to play RoboCop. Apparently, some of the actors, they were like, well, I'm going to be covered almost entirely. That's not really great for my career. Orion Pictures made this film. They wanted Arnold. He had just done The Terminator, and they were like, he's perfect.
Now he plays a robot. He can play a robot again. Yeah.
Except that they realized that because he's so big, he would look like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man in that suit.
Yes.
He's like, I'm a robot. I'm so huge. And so they were like, no, that's not going to work. We need somebody who doesn't look massive inside the suit.
Right.
And so they looked at Tom Berenger, Armand Assante, Keith Carradine.
Oh, wow.
Eventually, Weller, who had a sci-fi background. He was a marathon runner, and he had trained in martial arts. So he was really good at physical control, body control. He actually trained for months with a professional mime named Moni Yakim.
Okay.
And he wore a football outfit while he did it, assuming that he would have some limitation to movement.
Yeah.
So he trained for months, learning how to move like a robot. There was a big delay in getting the suit made because, of course, it took forever to make it. And so he was supposed to have it for a month to train in. He didn't. So he gets the suit. He can't move. He can't see. And it's almost impossible for him to grab things or people. So he becomes super frustrated. So frustrated that at some point he and Verhoeven got into a bit of a problem.
Oh.
And Weller got fired.
That was very quickly brought back.
Well, it was very much, the suit was specifically designed for him.
Ah, there you go.
We don't have RoboCop. We don't have time to make a new RoboCop. Can you fix this, you two? And so they fixed it. And he was brought back in. And then Moni Yakim came back and then worked with Weller on how to work with the suit and learn how to move. I have to say, watching it now, we watch these films, like Iron Man, for example. Iron Man looks amazing, right? In the Marvel universe, cinematic universe.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
100% CGI. Everything Peter Weller is doing, he's doing himself.
Yes.
Right? His robotic movements are genuinely his. He trained, he learned how to move like a robot, and he does it. If there's any win, it's like he is so rocking the robot thing.
Oh, yeah.
That is, it's just a costume. Everything else is him inside of it, making these movements and making it look that way. So, super amazing. I will say that both Weller and Verhoeven said that they were absolutely 100% miserable during the filming of this.
Sadly, though, that tends to yield some very good results in the end product, doesn't it?
Yeah. So they filmed in Texas and in Pittsburgh, mostly.
Oh,
in Texas, it was super hot, which means he was losing 3 pounds a day inside that suit. And then in Pittsburgh, it was super cold. Verhoeven was losing his mind because all the tech stuff wasn't working half the time. So both of them describe it as the worst experience ever. The only person who said, I had a great summer, was Miguel Ferrer.
Oh, okay.
He was like, this was awesome. Yeah, you know why, Miguel? Because you just had to wear a suit and be a jackass and then get murdered and snort cocaine off of people's chests. You were great. Great summer. Mom and Dad, great summer. This is RoboCop. What a ridiculously wild film. What questions does Steve have for the audience?
Not so much questions. I, for one, loved the framing device of the TV broadcast. We start with a news broadcast. We get commercials for ridiculous products thrown in, like the 6000 SUX, the 6000 sucks, which gets a whopping 8.2 miles per gallon.
They mentioned that multiple times. And in fact, at some point, the characters are like the gang. They're like, look, I got a 6000 SUX. And I'm like, are they really just spelling sucks?
Yes, they are.
Again, satire, comedy. Wow.
I have to say, that is the one thing I didn't pick up on in the movie. I knew that the commercials and the news broadcasts were satirical. I didn't realize that the actual, heavy, gory plot was also supposed to be satirical. I thought it was here's the ridiculous world we live in. And yeah, that's the violence that goes along with it.
I kind of felt the same way. After doing the research, I was like, oh my gosh, did I just not get this film?
Apparently I didn't, so I'm right there with you.
The way they described it was he wanted the violence to be so over the top. By the way, that first scene where that poor young executive gets shot, the director did not like how it turned out. They actually went back and reshot it and added more squibs. And the poor guy who did that said every single one of them hurt. Robocop had a hard time getting an R rating because it was so violent. They had to keep changing it because initially the MPAA, who does the ratings for films, they wanted to give it the X rating. This is too violent. This cannot have an R rating. So they kept having to change it. I think it was 8 times. Okay. They had to reapply for the rating. And what they did was they shortened some of the violent scenes. They added more of the broadcasts to interrupt the violence to try to get it down because it was just too violent. They did not like the mutated Emil exploding against Boddicker's car.
Oh, that's one of the scenes that this movie is known for, though.
That scene is so gross.
Yes, it is. And yet so satisfying.
Satisfying is the wrong word.
No, because you see a villain get his comeuppance in a rather grotesque way. But when you consider the havoc that he has wrought upon, Alex Murphy and the other citizens of Detroit, it's like, yeah, you deserved that.
Just to kind of give anyone who hasn't watched this film kind of a hint, Emil is one of the bad guys in Clarence's gang. And at some point, his car runs into a big giant... This is very 80s. It's a big giant thing that just says toxic waste on it. And then when he comes out, he is completely deformed. And it's atrocious in every way.
And eventually, he gets hit by Clarence's car and explodes like a water balloon.
The dummy that they used, they purposely made the head loose, right?
Right.
So when it hit the car, what they did not count on, this was by pure chance, the head rolled over the car's hood in the scene.
You see it roll up the windshield.
It goes up. Oh. It's so gross. It's so gross. There's a big, of course, fight scene at the end. And it's so violent. And at some point, the bad guy gets it in the neck, right?
Yes.
That is not the original desired thing. Originally, the director had it going in his eye.
Ooh.
But they were like, it's too violent. You're never going to get an R rating if you do this in the eye. So they did it in the neck. For those of you who are like, gosh, I wish I could see the original, the way it was intended, there is a Criterion Classic version, which is the X rating.
Oh.
Yes, where they added everything the way they wanted it to be. So if you want, I don't know if it's available now, but there was a time where you could buy a DVD of the grossest version of Robocop. Now, one of the things that the movie really does focus on, and I personally agree, I think this is actually one of the things that the movie gets right, is the loss of humanity of Robocop. And I think maybe this is where I'm confused about this film. And Steve, I want to hear your thoughts on this, because I think we have, once again, tone seems to be going like a ping pong ball. And okay, are we making a satire? Are we making a social commentary? And in the middle of that, there's Alex Murphy, who has lost his entire humanity. We make it a point to show that he had a family, and he has lost them, and he is not really human anymore, but he's starting to remember bits and pieces of it, and it's kind of really hard to watch a little bit because he is a good actor. So when we get to those scenes, you're just kind of like, oh, wow, this is kind of horrible. Can you go back to killing people?
I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about that particular aspect of the movie, because on the one hand, I love how subtly it was done. He has kind of flashbacks, he retraces his steps, he visits the house. The house is now vacant, but he looks at the empty fireplace and then has the flashback of what occurred in front of the fireplace while he was still Alex Murphy. He has several flashbacks like that, and then eventually becomes enraged, I'm guessing because he's realized what it is that has been taken from him. I loved how that was done. I'm just not sure I completely understand or completely like how it all ended up. Part of me remembered a scene, I think it's in Robocop 2, where he actually tracks down the family and watches them from a distance. I thought that was in this one. It was not. I'm not sure I got the sense of closure that I wanted on that particular arc of his.
I think that's what's interesting about the film, is that we don't get closure at this point in his story.
I have a note here that says, left a lot unanswered.
Yeah. And I think that's on purpose. Instead of closure, we get vengeance.
Yes.
Somebody described it once as sort of a B movie.
I can kind of see that.
I can kind of see that too. I think it's because of the over-the-top nature of it.
Yeah.
That pushes it into almost the B category. Let's talk about the end all of this film. This film was actually a surprise success. With a budget of $13.7 million, it made $53.4 million. Which is not like a raging success, but pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good for Orion Pictures. I will say that critics had a hard time with it.
That does not surprise me in the slightest.
First of all, they had a difficult time figuring out what kind of film this was, because it seemed to be, like, to put it in a genre seemed to be difficult for them. Some of them thought, this is great. And some of them thought, this is the opposite of great. Some like Verhoeven's directing, saying it was darkly comedic with a sharp social satire. Others found it over-directed, using the term sleazy psychological. Weller was praised for his performance by some of the critics, saying he was able to, like, despite the suit, to show vulnerability and sympathy, and I'm 100% supportive of this.
Absolutely.
It is absolutely a brilliant acting role for him.
To compare it to something a bit more modern, Weller's performance as Robocop kind of is along the same lines to me as Pedro Pascal's performance as the Mandalorian, where you do not see much of the actor, but just through the little bits, the head movements that you do see, that conveys a hell of a lot in terms of the character.
I don't even want to interrupt you because that's a brilliant comparison. To counter, others didn't like Weller's performance and thought it barely registered anything. And they actually praised Nancy Allen for being the only warmth in the entire film. So, again, everyone was all over the place. The violence. There was one comment that was like, sadism and poignancy?
Together at last.
Another one said, satire and corporate corruption as an excuse to indulge in violent visuals. It did win an Academy Award for Best Sound Editing.
Okay.
And was actually nominated for Best Film Editing and Best Sound, though it did not win.
Not visual effects, really?
Not visual effects, no.
Wow, okay.
It was a huge success in home video, unsurprisingly. What's weird about this film is we have just spent a very long time talking about how violent this film was. This film started attracting younger audiences, like myself, which turned into a merchandising smorgasbord.
Oh, yes.
By 1988, there was Robocop, the animated series. They took the bullets and replaced them with laser weapons. 12 episodes, they created toys, comic books, novels, theme park rides, action figures, an arcade game, a Nintendo game in 1988.
That one's a little surprising.
I played it. I actually looked it up. Thank goodness for the internet. I was actually able to look up footage of the arcade game and the Nintendo game, which is very similar.
Okay.
And I sat there going, I have played both of these things.
See, I remembered the arcade game because it used to be in the arcade above the skating rink that we went to every week.
That's awesome. Yeah. The movie theater had an arcade next to it. That's where we went.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Yeah.
I also found a story about a statue. There is a 10-foot tall bronze statue of Robocop that was crowdfunded to be put in Detroit.
All right.
It was completed in 2021. It has not been placed anywhere yet. There was a combination of, I think MGM owns the rights to Robocop, so there was a licensing issue. Then the artist got cancer, but it's actually in a warehouse somewhere. 10-foot tall bronze statue of Robocop is sitting in a warehouse right now. And the last thing that I read was they were hoping it would be installed in 2024.
Okay.
Some folks consider it one of the best films of the 1980s. Others believe it's one of the best science fiction action films of all time. They were working on the sequel, PG-rated sequel, by November of the same year.
Oh, wow.
And also they started working on the animated series instantly, which I believe I have watched. The writers for the original started writing the sequel, but during the 1988 writer's strike, they refused to continue working and they were fired. Frank Miller wrote 2 drafts for Robocop 2. And you know what they did? They took both drafts and they said, this is Robocop 2, this is Robocop 3. Peter Weller came back for Robocop 2, but not Robocop 3. Nancy Allen actually portrayed the same character for all 3 films. In 1994, there was a 22-episode TV series. The pilot episode was from a discarded Robocop 2 script written by the original writers of Robocop.
Oh, jeez.
So Robocop 2, Robocop 3, Robocop series, it was like, let's make this as family-oriented as possible. Let's get away from the dark stuff that made Robocop famous. Because we wanted to sell crap to kids is what this was about.
Okay.
So we needed kids to be able to watch the movie. And then in 2014, there was a reboot, which got very mixed reviews, and I've never watched it.
No, same here.
There's apparently Robocop Returns, which is the sequel to that film, which was in development. But I have not heard anything about it since then. So there you go. There was actually a crowdfunded documentary called RoboDoc, The Creation of Robocop. Came out in August 2023. Weirdly enough, I mentioned to a coworker that we were doing this episode, and he said, oh, have you seen the documentary? And I said, no, there's a documentary? And he said, yeah, there was a bit too much in that documentary. Like, they just too much information. But I don't know. I'm not going to judge. I haven't seen it. So if you're a big RoboCop fan, you could totally go watch the documentary. Here comes the big question, Steve.
Yeah.
Does this film hold up?
I think so.
Why?
I'm not sure how to explain it beyond I enjoyed it. This was a fun film to watch. Horribly gory, yes, but it's hit the right notes. It wrapped up the plots that it needed to wrap up. The movie ends very abruptly. I thought there was going to be like 10 minutes of wrap up while we tried to deal with the corporate aspect of OCP and what they were doing, but no, that's left unanswered. It's just okay, we've eliminated the big crime problem. End of story. But I was okay with that because it didn't drag out too long. It told the story that it wanted to tell. It had very good pacing. I was very pleased with it, very entertained, and I still liked it.
I am of mixed views of this one. I don't think it's a bad film. I don't know if it's a good film. I think it definitely feels like a B film to me. It's very gory. I feel like the tone is a little bit all over the place. And maybe it's just one of those things that if you saw it at the time, it would make more sense. But seeing it now, it doesn't make as much sense as it did probably then. Or maybe it didn't. I don't know. It depends on the critic. I think Weller's performance is fantastic. I think the suit is amazing. It still looks amazing now. I don't know. I'm not sure. Is this good? It doesn't hold up as far as, no female characters but one and not used very well. So in that sense, not so good.
One of the things that I absolutely loved about this movie was the exposition and the introduction to characters. That's something I touch on every now and then.
Sure.
I loved the fact that we didn't have any long explanations as to who is who. When we meet Officer Anne Lewis, she is kicking the butt of someone who's been drug into the station and is attempting to flee. She just knocks him out.
Yes.
Several times, if I recall correctly.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's like, okay, I know who she is. She is the badass cop. Fantastic. I got onto this because you mentioned that Anne Lewis isn't used particularly well. I slightly disagree with you on that one because I think she kicks butt.
She does for 5 seconds, and then she gets distracted by a penis and gets thrown over a railing, which goes against what they have already established of her character at the beginning. And I think that's where the inconsistency is. We do set her up to be a real badass, and I was excited. I was like, yes, that is exactly what I want to see. And then we have that scene, and it's a way to get her out of the picture. And then she doesn't, briefly, but only then she gets to witness him getting shot to hell and can't do anything about it.
Right.
Not saying that I don't like the character, because I do.
Right.
I just wish they would have done more, because what they set up at the beginning, they didn't follow through to a certain extent.
Do you not think that the later scenes redeem her slightly, because she is the one who recognizes Murphy's chin, I'm assuming? And
yes.
Ultimately, later on, she is the one who rescues him when the police are trying to kill him.
Yes. No, don't get me wrong. It's a great character. I just think that they kind of did a disservice to her a little bit with some of it.
Agreed. Okay.
This is my problem with it. It has really good moments, and it has really good bits. And then it has some other bits that I'm like, what the hell are we doing? And then on top of that, it's just so freaking gory. And I guess if you love that, then, rock on you. If you love gore, this is a good movie for you.
This is a good one.
Yeah, you'll dig it. And some people do. If you don't love gore in an action film, do not watch this film. It will not make you happy. So that is the end of Robocop. We have talked on and on about this film. Steve.
Sir.
The baton is ceremoniously passed to you.
Ooh, very nice.
What should we do next?
I would like to take us about a decade into the future from Robocop to 1997 to watch a movie that I remember liking quite a bit when it came out, and I want to see if I still do. So come with me as we watch Val Kilmer in The Saint.
That is going to be very interesting. I have also not seen that film in quite a long time, and I also did enjoy it then. But will we enjoy it now? There's only one way to find out. And by that, I mean, please like, subscribe, leave a review, and join us next time as we visit Val Kilmer's The Saint.
Sit back, it's time to get groovy. Question, do you remember that movie? Sit back, it's time to get groovy. Question, do you remember that movie?